This morning I took care of installing the motor. As stated before, I hung it off of that motor mount over there, and I left this one free. So after I had transferred it into the engine bay using the crane, I got this with my block of wood, and I supported the oil pan, and then I was able to maneuver the whole thing pretty freely, almost three-dimensionally entirely, because it was only on that motor mount with the nut loosely held on there. After I lined up the transmission far enough to get these lines into position, I put on this motor mount and sat it down there so this thing only can wobble. And that helps a lot with installing the transmission, because the moment you try to push the transmission, this whole thing just tries to shift wherever it can. Now, installing the transmission is a tricky one because you need to have your starter off. So with the starter off, I used a long extension and a swivel with a 14. And then I also, I did this by myself, but it's easier with a buddy. Get someone up here on your crank to rotate the crank until you can line up the stub from the flex plate and where it mates to the torque converter. Line that up into the starter hole, tighten that down up here, rotate 90, continue on. And it is very important that you don't cinch down the transmission until you're sure that the flex plate is lined up. As far as visual confirmation, all the stuff with the starter I did by feel because I couldn't physically see any of that. So there's the access panel on the underside of the transmission that you're able to see up into the transmission and line up those holes. So very important note there. Other than that, let's see. I've gone ahead and installed the transmission, of course. Let's get my light out. All right, transmission's already installed. That's the access panel I was talking about before. As we saw in the previous video, that's the guy that you pop off in order to see if the torque converter's lined up. I've already reinstalled the starter. It's over there. I'm leaving these wires loose for the moment. I have a couple of other things I need to take care of on the top side, and then I'll take care of those. The power plant frame is now installed, and I noticed something I didn't notice before. If you know what I'm looking at, you know what the problem is already. The sway bar was installed incorrectly by somebody, and when the suspension goes to the ground, that bend right there is because it gets caught on this piece here. The sway bar is supposed to be up at the tip of my light, up here, not out backwards. So it'll need new end links, if not a new sway bar, because the sway bar is likely bent in a way that it's not supposed to be. Like I said, I didn't notice this before because, well, I didn't do any work back there except for popping the exhaust down. We'll get to that later. So, I forgot to mention in the last video that I did install the trans tunnel heat shielding. We have a template we've made that is pretty decent. It covers up the NC trans tunnels really nicely. That's all taken care of. So, next thing I'll be doing is attaching those lines, as stated previously, as well as bolting it to the oil pan. This is a brand new OEM Mazda oil pan, as you can tell, because it is really pretty and clean compared to everything else under here. Let's see, the power steering rack is already in there, but I have not connected the outer tie rods, so I'll pop those off and install them in a bit. AC lines will go in after I install the harness. Oh, and there's those essentially brand new injectors because they've been cleaned and flow matched. I don't know if I mentioned before, I like to heat shield these. This is the heat shield that sits next to the exhaust manifold. And I like to put heat shielding on these because it just helps stop, well, anything additional you can do to stop heat getting from the exhaust to your brake lines or brake module is a good thing. So we always put a little bit of extra DEI there. Okay, we're pretty much as assembled as I'm going to get before we get that header in. So went ahead and threw on the tie rods, wheels off, spun the tie rods on, and then wheels back on. Then we'll take it down to get aligned after this thing runs. Everything engine bay is assembled. I was missing a clip over here. I'm gonna go see if I can't find one in my pile of stuff. Leaving the wiring harness loose on this end, so whenever the header goes in, I'll just wrap it around. New exhaust gasket, please always put a new one on. Got the new air filter in there. We're not gonna fill coolant because the coolant line's over here, not connected yet. Reconnected those automatic transmission lines. And then we will, after we get that header in here, we're also going to mount this up and figure out where we're going to put in our downstream O2 sensor, since we are going to maintain using the stock mid pipe. Okay. Oh yeah, and the hood's on. I'm gonna ask the customer if he wants me to take off that heat shielding. Personally, I always take it off if given the option, because it is strictly there for sound. It holds heat in the engine bay, which is something we don't want. But for the comfort of people, they put that on there so it makes the engine sound quieter. And let's be honest, if you're watching this video, chances are you want to hear more of your engine. If anyone Racing shipped us their header. We now have a 1.8 inch primary diameter non-ceramic coated model. Trying to be a little more budget friendly for the customer, so we got him the non-ceramic model. Goodwin Racing is now including these with the bungs installed. Previously they weren't installed. It looks like they went with a hex model now. Previously we were getting the Allen key ones, which frankly I don't like. Once they get stuck, they're hard to get out, or they round. They are now including exhaust gaskets. That must be a new thing, because I don't remember the last time, if the last time we got one. O2 sensor extensions, and we welded a bung right here after the stock cat. Again, so there's really not any performance to be gained unless you have a problem with this catalytic converter or you want a little bit of more noise. So we just put an O2 sensor after this for the better price difference. I'll go ahead and get that together. We'll put our tune from Zero Limit that we just got in, and we should be able to drive this thing later today. I do also need to wire in this guy. So the VVT actuator solenoid on this guy is different. So on many of the 2.5 swaps, just about all of them, depending which donor motor you get, you do need to change out for the pigtail, as in all my documentation I've put out there. Okay, I have tightened down the bung plug, and then I put the sensor on. I put some DEI sleeving over those connectors, because if they melt, you're going to really hate yourself. And because this is an automatic, I notched that. So I'll show in just a second how that fits. Now, due to the way this header goes in and the automatic transmission lines being where they are, I loosened the nut on this side of the motor mount so I could lift up the motor a little bit for this to pop in. I already popped this in for fitment check. Header installed. The bolts are put on this. I need to tighten that 10. Put the shield on, put the alternator in. Let's hop on the underside. So we slide on under here. This is the cut I made. As you can see, it clears. It's got that little plastic tab there, and shouldn't have any issues there. Now, these guys do not come with the header. You're supposed to take them off of your stock manifold and pass them over. Well, if you don't, or if you have damage on yours and you can't get them extracted, the part number is a L3M740584. It's called a silencer, since bolts are silencers apparently. Routed my wires over here, connected all of this stuff together. He still has his brackets that hold the O2 sensor connectors, which is interesting. No one usually has those. The thing that I like to do on these, if there's if they use the brace right here, which is all on all of the manuals, not on the automatics, then I will zip tie this to them to make sure this stays away from the ground. But in this case, I went ahead and just put a couple of P-clips here, and then just like I did in the front, I put shielding on there so this thing can flop around. There's not really anything to secure it to up here, so the shielding will take care of keeping it from getting cooked by the catalytic converter, as well as it'll keep the connector from getting damaged. We installed all the stuff in the engine bay. We're done on the underside. So now I just need to solder the VVT connector and we can fire it up. Fully assembled. Turn the key, make sure that we didn't have any weird stuff going on. Seems everything's good, so we're gonna go ahead and vacuum fill our coolant system. I use one of these cheapo hanging ones, just one of the multi-kits off of Amazon or whatever. Same as the name brand, but anyway, so we're gonna let this thing pull down as far as we can. It usually stops right before the end of the green. And then we will shut this valve and turn the vacuum off, and now we will let it commence to sucking up the 2 gallons worth of coolant we have here. I anticipated only taking 1.5 gallons because this is a stock coolant system on an automatic. All right, so what I usually do is after we finish all of this, make sure everything's running, we will pull a vacuum on the AC, replace out the AC dryer if everything's good, and then that's it. I did replace all of the AC O-rings on the system, since it did look like he had a leak over here and a couple other gaskets were original, so I just take the liberty usually of replacing all of them while I'm in here. Went ahead and, since I know this car has been through some dirty stuff, I went ahead and pulled the MAF and just wiped it off real quick with a Q-tip and some MAF cleaner. This thing's already run out of vacuum to pull, so we're gonna go ahead and just let that, we're gonna go ahead and let the car run with the rear end down on the ground and the front end very high up. I'm on the 6-ton jack stands, you know, about midway up. I'm just gonna let this run for a while and let it burp what it has. And then we'll probably have to pour a little bit more of that in. The system also may not have been completely empty because this is one of the first 2.5 swaps. I actually didn't pull the radiator. Most times people have me upgrade them or at least exchange them. This one he had recently replaced, so I had no reason to. Okay, as mentioned, we went ahead and burped it. So what I do, I put this in here. Obviously, like I said, the front end's really high up in the air. And I poured a lot of this into here, maybe about up to here. And then I let it just operate at about 2,500, 3K RPM. And I hold it there, and then this will start bubbling up, and then it'll start flowing down. And like I said, that's all that's left in there. It's less than a quart. So the system took almost 2 gallons. And then you always set this to maximum heat. And once you feel it come through warm, you know you're doing your job. But it's not truly done until it comes through scalding. Because these heaters in here should be like absolutely scalding. Like you should not be able to bear putting your hand in front of the vent. So after we got to that point, I let it sit there for a bit, made sure it burped everything, and now I'm just gonna let it cool down. I will end up sucking some of this back out of here, but the whole purpose is to have the fluid line high up. That way we get the maximum amount of burping going, as well as the holding at 3,000 RPM gets the maximum, well, not maximum. If you wanted to go maximum, it'd be like 7K, but gets a lot of flow going, so that way it can help get that air out of these lines back here and over into the engine. That way it can make its way to here very easily. Okay, so no leaks, power steering system burped, coolant system burped. I've loaded the tune. Next step is alignment. So once we get the front end alignment down at Todd's, we'll get we'll get a data log going on this, and we should be able to be done with this thing promptly. Found that we had a dead upstream O2 sensor, replaced it out, and everything runs well now. And here he is, pick it up.